Before we get started, could someone please text chat in if you hear us okay, or if we need to modify our volume? There's a chat box in the bottom left. Oh, thank you, Jennifer. Glad to know that. So anytime during the webinar, if you have questions, please chat those in down in the bottom left, and we'll take those. There'll also be some time for Q&A at the end. And, oh, great. Thanks, Tambra. And I am just going to make sure that we're doing okay. Can we minimize the thumbnails again? Yeah. Okay, great.
There you go.
Super. And thank you, Deborah. Okay, so this morning we have Kay Davis-Senseman. She's the founder of Davis Law Office, and we're really excited to have her here. She's also involved in some of those workshops, those in-person workshops later on, too, that are going to be in multiple languages. So we'll hear a little bit about that later. So we've got a real expert on our hands today to help us out with some of these new ordinances. And with that, I think I'm just going to get started. Again, if you have questions, please chat those in. And I'm Jill Perrin from MetroIBA, I suppose I should say that. Welcome, Davis.
Thank you. So yeah, I don't have a typical slide presentation. What we have is we have a number of resources, both resources that we've created and then resources that the City of Minneapolis has created. And if you are not in Minneapolis, if you're in St. Paul, don't worry. We're going to go over all the two laws are really, really similar. There's far more similar between them than different, and the cities kind of work together to do that. But we're going to go over all the differences. Just the reason I've pulled a lot of the City of Minneapolis's resources is Minneapolis has its own small business office, which just came into being last year. And they've actually they've surprisingly made a really nice and usable website, which I think took them a little bit of, struggle to break through the general bureaucratic websites. But they have a really great website, and that's kind of the number one place where both we and where we send clients to find information. Because one thing that they've done that I really appreciate, but that I think in looking back they've realized might be a bit overwhelming for business owners, is they went through a huge number of scenarios and they put them in a document. And it's one of the 4 documents that are available for employers. So a lot of employers have downloaded that document and then looked at it and thought, oh, this is too much. And so that document is really, I think, geared towards professionals. It's geared towards accountants, attorneys, the folks that business owners are going to turn to ask, how do I have to do this? Payroll companies. But it's out there, and I have heard from a lot of clients, I downloaded that question and answer sheet, and it was 30 pages, and forget it. And I totally understand that. I use that. I kind of have a printed out copy that's dog-eared and highlighted because I generally can find an answer in there. But I have kind of steered employers towards, don't worry about that big, long document. That's kind of the real insider's guide. But so I guess where incorrect one. Where we normally start is this document that I kind of tried to take, what we did in our office was we kind of tried to take all of the information that was available in all the different places, the Minneapolis website, the St. Paul website, the employer's guides for each of those, and really drill it down into what do business owners and employers need to know. So the first thing is the reasoning, because a lot of, have heard from a lot of folks as we've gone through this is why do we need this? And I find that that's a question we get more from smaller business owners, and I think I know why that is, because small business owners often make things work and work around a lot of things. So a lot of small business owners, although they may not have been doing this exact thing, there are a lot of small business owners who, if their employee was sick, they're not going to fire them because they have to stay home because their employee's sick. Or, if their kids have a snow day, they're going to tell them, I don't know, bring them in or do work from home. So a lot of small business owners were already making this work in whatever way they could. And so I think that this isn't as much of, this is just regulating and kind of evening a playing field for all business owners. And I think really, it's going to affect larger, you as a small business owner may have had to make something work because that's how it goes. You can't lose your employee because they are invaluable to your business. I think the change is going to be a lot more, it will be felt a lot more, I think, by bigger employers. And it will kind of force them to not be able to, just because their workforce is maybe a little more expendable, maybe each person doesn't have as much institutional knowledge as our smaller business employees do, they will still have to kind of play by the same rules. So really, I mean, the reason the city has put this into place and the reason cities across the country are starting to put this into place is the concern about the spread of contagious illness and the worry that if people do not have time off that they can take without worry of losing their job or not being paid, they'll come to work sick. The other concern in our particular statutes in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and what makes it sick and safe time, not just sick time, is, and we'll cover this when we go over the uses, but this also covers time that someone may need to take to seek law enforcement or counseling or other services related to domestic abuse, sexual assault, stalking. And that was really, I spoke with a few folks who run shelters and kind of crisis intervention programs. And the interesting thing is they have a lot of on-call staff. So they pushed really hard to include safe time in here because the amount of time it takes, if people have time off to be able to pursue law enforcement or counseling or whatever they need related to those types of occurrences, they're much more likely to do so. And that was really the deciding factor for a lot of people in pressing charges or seeking help was, I don't have any time that I can go do this. So the interesting thing is a lot of those shelters and crisis intervention places pushed very hard for this law. And then it came into being and they said, oh, geez, they had a lot of questions because they have people who are just on call and people who work different places around the metro and people. So it was really interesting to sit with some of those folks and have them say, we are so happy this is here, now just help us figure out what we need to do. So the good news is we've got we've already gone through with both the city small business office and with some of these different folks, really a lot of kind of the more, outside the norm of how this will be applied. So if anyone has questions as we go along about
Kathy has a question.
Yep. Oh, yep. And I'm going to cover that as we go through. I think we're going to cover that, but I want to keep that question. I see the question. It's if people who need counseling can go when they're not working, for example, they work part-time, is it still required to pay them for this? They are not asking off time for this. That's a really good question, and we're going to go through that kind of when we go over the basic rule. But remind me if we don't specifically answer that question, but I think we're going to. So that's the reasoning behind it. It was hoping that having this law would be limiting the spread of illness. That was really the number one concern, particularly in food service, because that was a huge concern. A lot of times when an outbreak of E. coli or something else happens, many times it could be traced back to it was, an employee somewhere in the supply chain who was handling something. So these laws are kind of, they're spreading across the United States, and actually right now Duluth is considering putting a law in place. And so I think what we'll see too is some of the questions and the intricacies of figuring it out that we have, because it's just the two twin cities and really we're kind of a connected metro. I have a feeling within the next 2 to 5 years we'll probably see this more statewide, and so that might become less of an issue. So the basic rule, and this is the rule the rule is a little bit, this basic stating is a little bit different Minneapolis to St. Paul, but only as who it applies to and when it comes into effect. But the basic rule is that employers in Minneapolis who have 6 or more employees working in their business, and that includes the owner. So you include yourself if you work in your business. You include part-timers, you include full-timers, anyone who works for you that isn't an independent contractor. If you have 6 or more, you have to provide paid sick and safe time to your employees. If you have 5 or fewer, you have to track and provide sick and safe time, but it doesn't have to be paid. Oh. So that's the difference. And we have heard from a lot of folks who say, oh, well, my staff, it fluctuates. Sometimes I have 10. Sometimes I have 4. What should I do? And there's a really good formula that the city of Minneapolis has provided that will work for either, both Minneapolis or St. Paul, to figure out kind of on average how many employees you have. And it basically kind of takes the 52 weeks of the year and how many employees you have, for X amount of days and kind of averages it out. So that's the 6 is when you jump from 5 to 6, that's the dividing line between paid and unpaid. But you need to be tracking it no matter what. And the way it works, who it applies to are employees who work either in the city of Minneapolis or the city of St. Paul. So your business doesn't have to be based in Minneapolis or St. Paul. If you are based, let's say, in St. Louis Park, so you're really close, and your employees are most of the time working in Minneapolis, then you're going to want to track when they're working in Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. If they're half the time working in Minneapolis, you're going to want to track. And what some employers have said who, kind of have employees working all over is, well, I'm just going to track it all. I'm just going to act as if they were always working in Minneapolis or St. Paul, which is something you are allowed to do. What has come up a lot when we've talked about this is folks saying, like, well, it would be easier if and as long as you're meeting the minimum, you can always do more. and that's really a question that folks have had. But so employees who work in the city of Minneapolis or St. Paul for 80 hours in a year. So if you have someone, let's say, here's a really good example. Let's say that you have a booth at the state fair, and you aren't from Minneapolis and St. Paul. Your business is, in Duluth or in another state. But let's say your business is in Duluth or right outside the city. And the only time, realistically, your employees are going to be working in Minneapolis or St. Paul is the state fair. If they're not going to work more than, 79 hours during the state fair, then this law doesn't apply to them. So basically the question is, you think of a person, and this law applies to the people. This law applies to the employees, and it talks about how the employer has to treat the employees. So if someone does not work in Minneapolis or St. Paul for at least 80 hours in a year, then this law doesn't apply. So, and then the way you accrue hours, once it does apply to you, once you've hit 80 hours, the way it applies is you get 1 hour of earned sick and safe time for every 30 hours you work. Or alternatively, you get 0.3 for every 1 hour you work. And so you should be able, if you use a payroll service, you should be able to tell them, my employees accrue this time, 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, and they should be able to set that up. That should be, and if you use a payroll service that you input some of the information, like QuickBooks, you should be able to call up QuickBooks Payroll or chat with QuickBooks, whichever method you choose, and tell them, this is how it accrues, how do I put that in? And they should be able to tell you because it's a pretty simple formula. The one area where St. Paul's website is somewhat superior to Minneapolis' website is St. Paul's website has an Excel sheet that Minneapolis doesn't have. And so you can download it there, and you can just, if you want to run it yourself and kind of track, even if you have a payroll service, it might not be a bad idea to say, well, for the first, payroll or two, I'm going to track it too and make sure we're doing it right. They have a really nice, simple Excel sheet that just basically says put in how many hours they worked. And so there's a question, and I think it's a really good question about, well, okay, they accrue 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, but this doesn't apply to them until they've worked 80 hours. Like, then it magically starts to apply. So what do? I have told all of my clients and anyone who's attended these seminars, and I've gotten the blessing of the city's small business office that, yes, this is the best way to do it. Start tracking from hour 1 that an employee works for you. And so if they work 30 hours, you'll have an accrued hour in there, but they won't necessarily be able to use it yet.
Okay, so they can't access it.
Exactly. Once you get to 60, they'll have 2, and once they get to 80, they'll still have 2 because you don't have to accrue by half if you don't want to. Depending on your payroll system, it may or may not accrue it. But then when it starts to apply to them, you'll have tracked their 2 hours.
Okay, Kathy's got a question about if it's available only after the pay period is on the check.
If someone is sick partway through a pay period, can they ask to be paid during the pay period? That's a good question. So use. So if someone has time accrued, so let's say that they let's just say that they work for you full time, and so they are just, they're accruing as they go. Let's say they've accrued 4 hours and they get sick in that, they need to have the time banked already. They need to have that time accrued. You don't have to let them kind of dip in ahead of time. Okay. So so they'd have to accrue. If they have worked the time should be accrued. They don't need to wait for their check to come to show them what they have. So if they called and said, I'm sick, I need to take time off, you would look and say, well, you have 4 hours of accrued time. So if you're taking the whole day, 4 hours would be paid, 4 hours would not.
So that could be handy to have that Excel spreadsheet because you may not have your payroll.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, also if you have a payroll company, it is well within your rights to say, I want you to send me, because a lot of times our payroll companies send us like monthly reports or quarterly reports or half-year reports. You pay for that service. So I think it is fine for you to ask as an employer, hey, every 2 weeks, can you just send me a printout of what everyone has accrued, save and sick time? Because, I want to know it. I think that if someone is sick after another 30 hours, first week of paycheck, so basically it doesn't matter when they get the check. It's just if they've worked the hours, they have the time accrued. So it would be a good idea for you to be keeping track, especially in the very beginning when they've just started work. It would be a good idea for you to kind of be keeping track on a spreadsheet and not just relying, because, you're right, if they were within their first 2 weeks, if you hadn't yet paid them, so you hadn't gotten a report yet.
Yeah.
That brings up another question. Many businesses, and I don't think this is a bad idea at all, have like a 90-day kind of training trying out period, kind of like a 90-day probationary period. And you are allowed to have a probationary period in your earned sick and safe time. So you are allowed to say, we have a 90-day probationary period where, and it's never a bad idea because then it kind of, if you hire someone and you just find out that, oh, no, this person does not have the abilities they said they did, or it's not working out, or they just realize oh, this type of schedule doesn't work, you can kind of part ways pretty easily. But you can have a 90-day period that people have to work for you before they start accruing earned sick and safe time. So that's fine too.
Okay, and you wouldn't have to back cover that.
Exactly. You don't have to back cover
as long as that's in your policy.
Yep, exactly. Okay. And a lot of this comes down to what you put in your policy. Kind of the cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis have built a basic structure and said this is the minimum that needs to be in the policy, but there's a lot of ways you can kind of deal with it.
Okay. So Kathy is following up.
Yep, when I write the check. So I have to update my payroll spreadsheet for every employee every day. Well, you'd only have to do it every 30 hours. So maybe about once a week. You just want to keep track of it. And there's a lot of the tracking, I feel like, is where a lot of folks kind of come up with questions. There's kind of two sections of question, tracking and use. But as long as you're accruing it and you can look it up somewhere, I mean, it's also, if someone calls in and says, I need to stay home today, I'm sick, it's okay. You don't have to be able to answer right away and say, here's exactly how much you have. You can say, okay, let me check. I can check and see how much, if you have any, or how much you do have of accrued sick and safe time, because you just have to be able to, I mean, that person's sick and they're staying home no matter what. Right. You just need to get it right by the time you pay them. You just need to figure out whether it's paid or not. So, you know, you basically will have a little bit of time to figure it out. In most cases, I assume if you pay every 2 weeks, you'd have just about 2 weeks to figure it out. Good question, Kathy. So do employees have to request it, or do you automatically do it? They don't have to request it. If they have accrued time, you have to cover it, even if they don't say, I want to use my earned sick and safe time. And that's because some employees may just not know that they have it, you know, may forget about it. In the heat of the moment when you're very sick or you have a sick kid, you might forget that you have it, but they don't have to request it. You just have to cover it, even if they want to save it. So that's a good question. We spoke with the folks at the Small Business Office. We had this scenario before. I mean, they could specifically say they don't want to use it, but unless they say that, you should pay them for it. Because earned sick and safe time is not something that you get if you get fired or if you leave your job. You don't get it paid out.
Okay,
so
use it or lose it.
It's use it or lose it. Now, at the end of the year, they can carry over. So in this first year that we have earned sick and safe time, they can earn up to 48 hours, so 6 days. They can carry over up to 40 hours. Okay. And then the most they can have accrued is 80 hours. So basically, if an employee has worked for you long enough and not taken any time off, and if you have 6 or more employees and you meet all the other things, they could have up to 10 days possible of earned sick and safe time. But that's the most. Once they get to 80, you know, they would need to use some to drop down below 80 to then. Okay. And you can limit it to, but they still never get paid out. When they leave your employee, they never get paid out. That's just, and with paid time off, oh no, what happened? With paid time off, if you have a PTO policy and you don't specifically say, there it is.
Sorry about that. My internet glitched.
If you don't specifically say, you know, we don't pay these days out, then you will have to pay them out. So if you have PTO separate from earned sick and safe time, you might want to specifically say it doesn't get paid out. I think it's also a good idea, if you have a handbook, to just put in there that earned sick and safe time doesn't get paid out. That is the law, but letting people know is never a bad idea. I can see wanting to hold on to earned sick and safe time in the summer in order to have it available. Yes, in the fall or winter when the kids tend to get more sick. That's a really good point, Jennifer. And so that might be, people might say, listen, I'm sick today, but don't pay me. I don't want to use my time. I got to save it for when my kids are sick, you know, 3 to 4 days a week. And the year is basically whatever you want to make it. So you could make it the anniversary date of when the employee started, or you could just, you can say your years run January to December, and you could just kind of, if you hire an employee halfway through the year, you could just start them then. You know, it would, but you wouldn't have to, like, you don't have to make the year, you don't have to have a different you know, December 31. Or if you're a business that for some reason has a different fiscal year, you're allowed to use that as your year too. It doesn't have to be December 31. It's basically whatever is easiest for the business. That's the rule. So that is, let me look on here. So we've gone over the accruals. and the banking and carrying over. And there was a lot of confusion when this law first came out because people would say, there was one session where folks were really concerned and had a lot of questions, and then someone on the panel finally asked, how many of you offer paid time off anyway to at least some of your employees? And almost everyone in the room raised their hand. So this is not, if you offer paid time off, even if it's just to some of your employees, if what you offer meets this, so if you offer at least, 6 days by the time they've, if you let them accrue 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, and if you let them kind of carry over, if your PTO policy fits this, then you may only have to do earn sick and save time for the folks who don't have PTO. So we had somebody, yep, that's totally okay, Kathy. The question was, my managers will be getting PTO rather than ESST. So managers will get buyout when they leave and can use for vacation or sick and safe. That's absolutely okay. And we had someone who, they offered 5 days of PTO. And so they were thinking, and I was like, well, you can track and accrue and do all of this for the 1 day, for 8 hours. Or you could just start offering them 6 days, and then that would be fine. And
you don't have to do the
exactly. And I said, I think for as much as they're going to use it versus how much time you're going to spend tracking it, I think it's going to be better to just maybe offer the 6th day. The other question that folks have is, a lot of folks have been concerned that the accrual and the tracking and everything will be too difficult and will take too much time.
Right.
And so if you want, you're allowed to just front load and just say to your employees, hey, starting, July 1 or starting January 1, depending on whether you're in Minneapolis or St. Paul, we're just going to give you 6 days. You can carry over 5 of them, and that's it. And we're not going to accrue or track, and you're just going to get them. And so some folks have decided to do it that way.
So you have the flexibility to make it work so long as you meet the
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And what you can do is, you can front load, and then if you decide, oh boy, this wasn't working, then you can go back and decide to accrue. Or if you front load, and then maybe you grow a little bit and you decide to switch payroll companies, and the new payroll company is really a lot easier to use, you can switch it. You just have to let people know, the same way you change any work policy.
Okay.
So you can do that. It's not like you're picking your system now and you're stuck with it forever. you can change it. And then the use, and this section here on this handout is taken directly from the statute. These are the uses that you can use it for. It can be used for preventative care. So, if a dentist or a doctor visit, for things like that are preventative, that are not kind of acute and immediately, you can ask for at least 1 week of notice. So that's called a foreseeable absence. Those would be things that you plan for. You can ask for up to a week. Sicknesses, snow days, things like that, anything else, you can't require a certain amount of notice, because it's impossible to know. But you can say, here's the policy. You can say, we would really appreciate if you call in as soon as you know. So if your child gets school called off the night before, call and let somebody know. And that's totally fine. Let us know as soon as you can. You can limit, you can force it to be taken in 4-hour chunks. That's you can say that's the smallest, so that people can't take, I'm going to take an hour here, an hour there, an hour here. You can say, no, you have to take up to 4 hours. And that may make the difference between someone thinking, I'll schedule a dentist appointment and get the time covered. Well, no, you can't just take 1 hour. You got to take 4. And so that's going to kind of drop your accrual down. So the major differences in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So in St. Paul, businesses with 23 or fewer employees, and I don't know how they got to that number. I don't know what, their effective date is January 1. So basically, if you're in St. Paul and you have 23 or fewer employees, you've got a little more time. In Minneapolis, the effective date was July 1. However, the Minneapolis Small Business Office for the first 6 months here, and I think it's probably going to be a year, but it's definitely the first 6 months, July to December. Their enforcement division is really more of a training division. So like if they know that if they get a complaint from an employee that says, my employer is just not doing this, they're not going to come out and start issuing citations. They're going to come out and try to train the employer how to do it. Okay. So because they know that it takes a long time for everybody to get the word out. So that's Minneapolis' deal for the first 6 months. St. Paul decided to just say it won't be in effect for 6 months and try to,
and use like a soft training period then.
Exactly.
Okay, Sarah has a question.
Yeah.
So is there any way they can use the time for vacation?
Well, you can have that policy if you want, but you do not have to let them.
Okay.
So, they can't just say they can't. Now, the deal with proof, we've had a lot of folks worry about what about abuse and what about proof? So if someone's out for 3 days, they use Earn Sick and Save Time for 3 days. On the third day, you can ask for proof. You can say, I need a doctor note. I need a receipt that shows that you were with the police. I need, I need some proof. But you can't ask for that until the third day. But what you can ask for anytime is for them to verify to you that they were using the time for a permitted use. And what I have kind of thought about, and I spoke with the folks at the Small Business Office in Minneapolis, and they said, sure, that's not a bad idea, is you could, if you wanted, have a form that everyone signs once they get back from a sick or safe time leave that says, by signing below, I am attesting that I used my time for one of the following. Now, you can't have them check it off because you can't ask them. Exactly. Okay. But you can ask them to verify with a signature that they used it for one of these. And a reason for doing that might be if you have a concern, that every time this employee accrues 8 hours, they suddenly have a day off, and you think, this is fishy, you might want to get them to sign these things because you might find out later, you might see, the good thing is that people live their lives online now. So you might see a photo that says oh, this is interesting that when you were sick, you were tubing down the Apple River, or this is interesting. And so you might find proof at a later date. And so so the good thing is if you find out that they were not using it for covered time, they're not covered. So you can, all the protections they have here, you could doctor pay that time, you could, whatever your company's discipline policy is, up to, you could terminate them. And they wouldn't have the protection. They couldn't later go and say, you weren't allowed to terminate me because you're retaliating, because you're not retaliating because they weren't using it for a protected reason.
Okay. That's the primary difference between PTO and ESSD. They have to prove that it's for one of these.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and they just have to say it, and if you're out for 3 days, they should be able to provide you something. If you have your kid home one day because they have a fever and they're not allowed to go to school, you might not take them. That's understandable. You might not take them in to the doctor. If they're sick for 3 days, it's probably at least time to go. Yeah. And so, and the proof can be, there's no real kind of, it's loose. It says you can request a doctor's note or a receipt or something.
Okay. So Jennifer was wondering if you were going to enforce the 4 hours, how is that a good policy? Like if somebody wanted to make an appointment at the end of the day or didn't want to miss as much, as little work as possible.
I think the reasoning behind the policy is because a lot of business owners were concerned that people would be taking 1 hour here, 2 hours there, and so they thought that most, and I don't know how true this is, they thought that most maintenance type things, going to the dentist, going to the doctor, could generally be scheduled outside of working times. Now, I don't know that that's true because finding a doctor that has, but what you could do, you can, if you want, say, you can take an hour here or you can take 2 hours here, because you can always be more lenient than what the rules say. So you could even say, I know some businesses that put earn sick and save time into place like a year, 2 years ago when the city first started talking about it.
Okay.
Because they were food businesses and they said, oh, this seems like a good idea. And they have said that on average, they only have about 8 hours use a month. And it's not really a lot more. They thought they'd have a huge spike in the winter.
Right.
And they said they really don't. But they also decided after about a year that they were going to let people use it for vacation as well. Because they said, you know, sometimes we have folks in here, and they're a bakery, so they said, oh, sometimes we have folks in here at like 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, 6 days a week for X amount of time. You know, sometimes we like to be able to say, you should take a day off. Like, you've been working really hard. You should take a day off. So those businesses have, some of them have said, I'm going to let people use it for vacation. Some of them have said, I pay it out to people when they're leaving. But you don't have to do those things.
Okay.
Yes, Jennifer, that's a good point. Generally, doctors, they might say, like, no, don't bring them in. But you could even, you know, nowadays, even if you do, like, the virtue care,
nice.
You'll have an email receipt of, like, the fact that you did it, because you'll, and that would suffice. But you can generally probably call, and I would imagine the doctor's offices will be more, they're going to know eventually, probably as this rolls out, they're going to know that when people are off for 3 days, they might need a note. And so it's not uncommon to, you know, call. I don't think it will be uncommon to be able, if your kid is sick with something and you don't want to take them in, to call the doctor and say, hey, I need a note, or I need something.
Right, and odds are you have to give that to the kid's school.
Exactly.
Or school already to
notify.
So
and really, I think if you were really strapped, if you were really at a loss to getting proof, I think I would argue that if you could prove that the kid was out of school for 3 days, if you could ask the school to say, yep, that kid was not in attendance for 3 days, that's pretty good proof that, like, you know, you were home with a sick kid.
Which employer is going to be reasonable.
Yeah, exactly. And we keep talking about children, but the interesting thing about the statutes is that they're written to say family members, and family includes anyone that lives in your home. So if you have, you know, a friend or a more distant relative or somebody that lives in your home, if you are taking care of them, that is included in care for the employee or a covered family member. They're included in covered family members.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah, and so that was,
that's helpful.
Yeah, that was because, you know, if you live in a home with someone, chances are that if they are sick, you may be the one, or injured, you may be the one that they need to rely on. So it makes it a little easier than, you know, I broke my arm. I broke both bones in my arm earlier in the summer.
Ouch.
And there was a period of time before I had the surgery that basically put it back together. There was a period of time where I kind of couldn't be home alone because I couldn't do anything. And, you know, that would allow, if I lived with like a roommate, that would allow my roommate to be able to take the time off to be there with me.
Okay.
You know, I generally wouldn't be considered a family member, but it's the easiest for someone in your immediate home to just stay with you.
And elder care.
Exactly. Okay. Yep. Yeah, and so your grandparents, parents, great aunts, they would all count as well.
That's great.
So that's the other big difference between Minneapolis and St. Paul. If your mother lived alone but not with you, nope, she would, I believe your parents are covered. So she would be covered as a family member, even if she didn't live with you. But she would be considered. So the other big difference between Minneapolis and St. Paul is that St. Paul, and I don't know why they did this, but St. Paul allows a private right of action by the employees if their employer is not abiding by safe and sick time.
Okay, so private right of action.
So yes, what's that? So that means they can sue about it. So in Minneapolis, if you think your employer is doing the wrong thing, the only thing you can do is call up the city and say, hey, they're not doing the right thing. And you know, the city's going to react and they're going to come out. And if we're in this introductory period, they're going to they're going to help the employer figure out how to do it. And, you know, if it continues, then they're going to do something about it. They're probably going to issue a citation, issue a fine. In St. Paul, I believe they still have that same structure. but they also are allowing the individual employee to sue the employer. We've run through this in myself and a few other attorneys, and we've tried to figure out, like, if it's happening, I can't see it going on long enough if the employee hasn't called and reported it to the city because they were thinking, like, oh no, I want a big windfall. Like, I would think that a judge would say, right, if they were like, oh, I'm going to bring this lawsuit. And it's normally not the employee. The thing that worries me the most about this whole allowing a private right of action is this last section. It allows for fee switching. So it allows, if you prevail, it allows you to get your attorney's fees covered. So what worries me is that there may be some lawyer who will say, oh, let's see if we can bring this case, and will seek out and encourage people. And we've had that in the Twin Cities before with some, different types of things. We had an ADA, and MetroIBA has been good about helping to kind of coordinate and fight back against those things. That particular attorney is no longer, he's disbarred. So, but so that may happen. I don't know that it will. And I don't know, I would think that a judge, if an employee said, I was just waiting around. I didn't call you up, City of St. Paul, because I was just waiting around to have a bigger claim. I think a judge would not look too fondly upon it.
That's not a good
no, and it's not what was, oops, we're reloading. It's not what the statute was intended for. And judges have the leeway to say, like, no, it's not the statutory intent. So I'm not too worried about that. It just is one difference between Minneapolis and St. Paul. If your business is in Minneapolis, or if your employees mainly work in Minneapolis, you don't have to worry about, oh, I thought so big. You don't have to worry. Yeah, look at that.
Can I help any of this?
There we go.
I don't know. Okay.
You don't have to worry about them suing you. So that's the good thing. Okay. Also, lawsuits are pretty, it takes a lot to bring a lawsuit. So, but I'm glad that Minneapolis said, nope, you know what, we're just going to have enforcement actions. We're not going to, there's not going to be private lawsuits about it.
Okay. Deborah wants to know, can PTO full-time accrue higher rate than ESST? So, like, could it be that, like, for every 8 hours, like every 10 hours they work, they accrue an hour of PTO? You can absolutely. Your PTO, as long as your PTO is more generous and still meets all these criteria, then yes. But you can have, Kathy, yes, nonprofits are required to provide the same. But yeah, your PTO is kind of, in some ways it's kind of a separate animal from Earn Sick and Safe Time, and it is absolutely okay if you have a certain set of employees who get PTO and, full-timers versus part-timers, managers versus not managers. That's absolutely okay. What about interns?
Paid interns are covered.
Paid interns are covered.
So basically anyone you pay who's, not in a legitimate independent contractor relationship, they're covered. Okay. But independent contractors, they're not.
Right.
So,
right. They're
because they're not employees. They're employees of whatever company you're contracting with. So let's go over, here is the employee notice. This is basically what you need to put up. And you can get these from the City of Minneapolis's website, their Sick and Safe Time website. And this is what you print out and you put up. And it's 8 by 10, 8 by whatever a regular paper is, 11 by 8, 8.5 by 11. That's just fine. And if you don't have a color printer, that's just fine. They're not going to come in and say, like, this isn't in the right color, or this isn't. I know some of the labor posters that you get are bigger. Right. This is okay this size. You put it exactly where you put all your other labor posters. And this kind of this is the notice to employees. If your employees speak more than one language, if you know you have employees who, primarily speak Somali or primarily speak Spanish, you're going to want to put this. The city of Minneapolis has this notice in all the different languages. I believe St. Paul also has the poster that will explain theirs, but I'm not 100% sure because our website is prettier, it's a bit prettier. So I spend most of my time there. And then this is a handy piece of information you can get from, so those photos, those happy people up there at the top are from the Minneapolis website. And this is employer checklist. So this is basically, it's 2 pages. And the city of Minneapolis put it together to kind of help employers step by step through whether they need it. And this will really help. This is really helpful when you're like, well, I have some PTO. Does it cover? This kind of helps you step through, like, if I have all this stuff in place, then I'm good to go. St. Paul does have a poster. Okay, good. I thought they did, but yes, not as pretty. This is a really helpful. They're really helpful. This checklist. Even if you're in St. Paul, I would still use this checklist if you wanted to. Just know that you've got the 23 exception. But this employer checklist is really helpful. And then, so this is a notice to employees. What else? So we've had some questions about, what if someone is on call? What if they are not working but they are on call? And those are pretty specific kind of industry questions. But basically I said, to be safe, I would count the time that they're on call toward their kind of accruals. But I don't know that that's 100% that you have to, because I know that you often can pay someone a lower wage when they're on call. So I kind of really specific questions like that, I think they're totally okay to get in touch with the city of in Minneapolis, the city of Minneapolis's office, or in St. Paul, their office, because that's some of the things they're kind of hoping to answer. And it's taking, I would say right now it's probably taking about a week to 10 days to get an answer back, but folks are getting answers back.
Okay.
And I'm happy to field questions kind of after this webinar. If something comes up and you're like, oh, what about this? Chances are we've looked at it before, or it's in the big handout that the city has with all the scenarios and questions and answers. That's a really thorough document and definitely overwhelming for anyone who doesn't, thrive on reading and parsing really confusing documents. But I'm happy to answer questions as they come up for folks, because sometimes it's not going to come up until you're deep into your setting it up in your payroll policy. So a lot of your payroll companies will be able to kind of set this up for you, and should only need to know for every 30 hours they accrue 1 hour. That should be the only information they need. If you have employees who are, if your business is based in Minneapolis or St. Paul, and you have employees who are kind of travel throughout the metro, I think it's probably easiest to just count all of their time. I mean, they're still going to max out at 48 hours per year for the first year, and then 40 a year going forward, basically. And so I think it's probably easier to just, you can parse out, okay, you worked 27 hours in the city this week and 12 somewhere else. Especially if they, we've talked to landscapers, especially if you know what projects they work on, but that might just be creating more work for yourself. And I really do think that this will be something, if Duluth passes this, which I think they will, then I think it's slowly going to just become a statewide issue.
Okay. So Kathy's got another follow-up question. 4 hours,
yeah. 3 hours that day, or they only want to miss 1 hour of a shift. So you can say that they have to take 4 hours. I think if they have, I think they do. I'm going to need to look into it for you. So if you shoot me an email after this, I can follow up for you. But I think that you may need to let them use what they accrued. But if they only want to miss 1 hour of a shift and you have you can say, sure, that's fine. But you are also allowed to say, well, you have to take it in 4 hour chunks. And that's just for ease of kind of record keeping on the part of the employer. For part-timers, when they're sick and miss a shift, but for their preventive care, doesn't it seem like it would encourage it? Yeah. Yeah, you could. I mean, so if they asked for the time off, I think if you rework the schedule, if they asked for the time off, if they said, next week, so they're gonna lose 4 hours, even if it's just for a 1 hour appointment. You can say, well, it's a minimum of 4 hours, and that was created to possibly deter someone from basically, using it during a time when they could do it otherwise, especially if they only work part-time. I think if you reworked the schedule so they were off that time after you got the notice, I think technically that could be seen as retaliation because you took the time away from them. So I would say not to do it. You can certainly say, although, you could say, we encourage you to take, if possible, to schedule your appointments outside of work hours. Any place, that's an okay policy to say. But if you have to, here's the way it works. You're going to lose up to 4 hours, even if it's only 1 hour, and we need at least 7 days notice. Sarah, yes, they can't use it for Christmas vacation. They can only use it for the covered uses, which on this has a good list of them. But no, like Christmas vacation or anything like that would not be covered. If you have a generous PTO policy, is it advisable to separate out ESST and vacation? Are you covered because you provided to them? I don't think you have to separate it out. If you have a generous PTO policy that meets all of this, the only reason to separate it out would be if you require more than 7 days notice for a vacation, or if you have specific times of the year where you don't let people take vacations, which you're allowed to do because PTO is a benefit. Yeah. It's not. So if you could say that, we don't, or if you say like, we want you to take a vacation during this time or whatever, or, I think that's the only time I would say separate out the earned sick and safe time. Otherwise, there's no reason you have to. Just leave it all, because you were basically already providing that to your employees. You were doing. You're already doing what they're hoping to get everyone to do. You don't have to track it separate or separate them out. I think it's fine to say, guess what? Lucky you employees. We've been doing this for you the whole time.
Right. We meet those.
Yep.
Nothing's going to change.
And I've also talked to some folks who are worried about, and it's understandable, some businesses that their employees work around the metro, who were like, well, I'm going to have to do this, but my competitors who are right outside the city aren't going to have to. Yeah. And that is, right now there is a question of if your business is outside, because the city does, both Minneapolis and St. Paul do intend to enforce this against businesses that are outside the city whose employees work in the city, majority of the time, or at least part of the time. There's a lawsuit right now brought by, I believe, the National Chamber of Commerce, saying that, challenging whether the cities can do that. But so it's not decided yet. But, so someone was worried, like, well, while that lawsuit is in place, my competitor, who's based in Bloomington, doesn't have to do this. And so I just told that business owner, I said, I encourage you to advertise this, that you have this policy when you're hiring people, because they had a business that was seasonal, that in no way did people normally get PTO. Right. And I said, listen, just put it in your ad, because then all things being equal, your job is going to be way more attractive. Yeah. You're going to get, I think you're going to get higher quality applicants. I mean, that's the theory behind benefits. Definitely. So, I've encouraged people who are in industries that normally do not have PTO or any type of time off, or for positions that you wouldn't think, just to remind people, hey, we abide by Minneapolis or St. Paul's earned sick and safe time, so that means you get up to, X amount. Because a lot of people applying for jobs also won't know this at first. Right. If you just moved here, there's a lot of people who won't know. So, Jennifer, thank you for posting that link. That's where the St. Paul posters are. Yeah, and you can tell your employees, like, hey, we do not want you, you know, if your PTO works or once you put earn sick and save time in place, you can tell them, we don't want you coming to work sick, you know. You got this time, we want you to use it.
Right.
Because sometimes it is, there's, you know,
if
concern.
you go to work sick, can you send them home and say, I will?
You certainly can, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if they're sick, you know, if they come in and you think like, oh no, this is not safe, this is not, you're not going to be able to work today, you can say, listen, go home. I'm just going to apply your sick and safe time. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Because I think even though we have these notices and these posters for employees, you know, they may sometimes forget. They may still, or they may think like, oh no, I need to go. But you are, it is within your right to say. And it was before, you know, but before it was you could send them home and they might not get paid.
Right.
A lot of employers would be like, go home, I'll just still pay. You know, they wouldn't think about. But yeah, you can certainly say, listen, we don't want you working sick.
Okay, we just have a minute or two left, so keep your questions coming.
Yep.
And is there any other handouts or something? I know you have some face-to-face.
Yep, so this is coming up tomorrow. If you know anyone, we have Spanish-speaking attorneys and also Arabic-speaking attorneys who will be at this event, and it's at the Midtown Global Market. So the one tomorrow is at 2 o'clock. Or if, you know, we log off today and you think, oh my goodness, I have so many more questions, just come. Let's talk in person at 2 o'clock tomorrow. It's down in the basement of the Midtown Global Market. But yeah, so we'll be there kind of for an hour, answering questions, talking a little bit more about earn sick and save time.
Super.
And I don't think we have any more. Just this, I would just, again, point out this employer checklist that's available on the Minneapolis site, even if you're in St. Paul. I think it's helpful. I think it's a helpful list to use.
Okay, and with that, I'm going to pop back over here and just wanted to let you know a couple of upcoming things from MetroIBA. Thanks so much for tuning in today. This was very informative, and I really appreciate, Davis, you coming on over and helping us out with this. Coming up, we have a Tuesday networking event on 4:30 to 6:30 on the first Tuesdays of the month. This time, August 1st, is over at the East 7th location of Mississippi Market. Please come on down. We'll have some time for networking, time to give your elevator speech, and one of the attendees will be chosen to be, one of the attending members will be chosen to be a featured business in our August newsletter. So that's a good chance to come on down. August 15th, we have More B, and that's for members only. It's a roundtable. You do need to be vetted to make sure that you're not in a competitive situation with an existing attender. So more information on that and any of our other events are on our website, metroiba.org/events. Take a look at that. And the most important thing is our Buy Local Twin Cities guide is coming out. And our membership deadline is July 28th. So every member is going to get a free basic listing in our guide, and we have 25,000 copies of those. 10,000 go out with Minnesota Monthly Business Magazine, and another 15,000 are going to go out on racks throughout the town, especially through the Super Bowl and area. We'll be featuring those. So if you're not already a member, you are welcome to check out MetroIBA.org membership and see the benefits of becoming one and learn how to join. And otherwise, thank you so much for coming. The recording links and presentation resources will be sent out a little later today. And thank you so very much. End event.